Yes, there was a general feeling, at least in my community, and I think this is true of many around the nation, that progress could be made, that there could be radical social change. Am I saying the right? That my math is not good, but when some of the civil rights laws were being passed, I was in elementary school, and I do remember that. I remember being very, very interested in the civil rights movement. By the way, I grew up in Hyde Park in Chicago, which was a pretty progressive place to grow
Mm,
up. My parents were very liberal. They weren't involved in the civil rights movement, but they were very liberal. My father was a professor, and his friends and my mother's friends were all, pretty left-wing liberal people. And I think was more interested in the civil rights movement and activism than even my parents, even as a young girl in Hyde Park. And I do remember going to meetings at a local church to keep on top of what was going on in the South and also in our neighborhood, and just being interested. I co-edited my elementary school newspaper, and
mm,
so was interested at an early age. I would have been 12 years old at the time, in
mm,
eighth grade, turning 13 while I was in eighth grade, and got to meet with John Johnson, who edited Ebony magazine and Jet magazine, which were the prominent Black media at the time.
mm,
And his niece was in my class in Chicago. And so I had a keen interest in writing about social justice issues, and not participating so much because I was so young, but learning about and doing what I could to participate at that age. Certainly keeping on top of and having a keen
mm,
interest in what was going on in the civil rights
mm,
movement.
mm. I wasn't around at that time, obviously, but I can only imagine. I can only imagine that it's like the opposite of 9/11. Like if that makes sense. Like everyone's gathered around the TV, things are happening, big bills are being passed, like these huge moments in society, but it's for a good feeling. Like everyone feels good. They're like, oh shit, like I'm gonna remember where I was on this day. Like the day that this happened, this is gonna stay with me for the rest of my life. Is that kind of what it was like during that period where you had all these progressive things being passed and you're like, holy shit, I can't believe this is happening?
Yes, there was a general feeling, at least in my community, and I think this is true of many around the nation, that progress could be made, that there could be radical social change. I
Mm,
grew up with that feeling. And I think that's even, if I can't remember going to the South on a bus to protest, because I was too young to do that, and my parents
mm.
weren't engaged in that. I suppose I could have gone along with them. But what
That
I
would have been
remember,
risky for a 9-year-old to
I
hop on the
think
bus and
so.
go down
I
there.
think so. But there were young Black kids who were
Yeah,
involved
yeah.
actively in the civil rights movement in the South, who had fire hoses uh, uh, poured on them and that kind
Mm,
of thing.
yeah.
In Birmingham, Alabama, for example, there was a protest by school children. So it's not unheard of that children were involved, but that wasn't my experience.
Yeah.
But my point is, my overall experience that I took from growing up in the 60s was that you could build a movement that would be successful in making radical change. It was a very uplifting, hopeful feeling that I think maybe I've felt uh, a couple times since then, but only a couple times with March for Women's Lives I participated in
Mm,
2004, I think it was, and then with the uprisings in summer 2020. But still nothing to compare with that feeling as a child during the civil rights movement of seeing victories, major victories in federal legislation, in changes in society, changes in thinking that occurred, and seeing massive protest across the South. Also remember, there were protests against the Vietnam War going on at the same time as well, and seeing the war end largely as a result of the protests, of course, also as a result of the loss by the U.S. in Vietnam, but the protests also having a massive impact across the United States, and seeing this, on the news every night. That was all very important to my upbringing, and I think my hopeful approach to social change today, despite all of the setbacks that we see.